The lake trout will do what we call head shakes. The bigger fish, when they start doing those head shakes, you kind of know right there that, it might be a bigger fish. As he got closer to the boat, he actually gave me a pretty good run, which isn't all that common for lake trout, but it was big enough to strip my line back off and he went right back to the bottom.
Welcome to WinniPlus, a podcast about the people, places, and businesses that define the culture of the Lakes region. Now for today's episode.
If you were ever to go looking for Mike Donovan, a recently retired engineer and resident of the Lakes region, you'd probably find him out fishing on Lake Winnipesaukee. But growing up, it wasn't always fishing on big lakes. It was the complete opposite.
In fact, I grew up in Exeter, southern New Hampshire, but my dad had a camp in Rumney, so we did a lot of stream fishing, and so brook trout fishing and just walking around in the woods was always something I enjoyed. I love the outdoors, and one of the reasons I bought this property was because it was on a lake. We never really had a boat, so we didn't go lake fishing or pond fishing. It was always hoofing it on streams.
Mike had another passion, engineering, and that career took him out of New England for a bit and around the world.
Well, I got out of college in 1980. And at that point, started looking for a career in engineering, and I ended up in the oil and gas industry. So I ended up traveling throughout the United States, working in that job for a company called Schlumberger, and ended up working throughout the United States, and then had different assignments all over the globe, actually. And then at the end of my career, I was 35 years with the same company. I was starting to look around to decide where I wanted to be after I ended my career, and I loved New England and I wanted to come back to New England. I have family here, and I decided to start looking around for some property, and I found this property that I'm living on now.
Now settled in his new home, Mike began exploring his backyard, Lake Winnipesaukee.
Winni's got some great character to it. It's one of the reasons I enjoy this lake, and I often tell people that I have a 45,000 acre backyard. Just for that reason, because I can hop in my boat and go anywhere I want, especially this time of year. The next month or so before Memorial Day, there's not going to be a lot of traffic on the lake. And so some days I'll be out there and have, I won't see anyone. It's just so nice to be out there and have that solitude. So I like cold water species fishing. So I go primarily for salmon, lake trout, rainbow trout. So I do a lot of trolling. I enjoy trolling, and it's not for everyone. Some people often say, that's seems like a bit of a boring type of fishing, but I enjoy it, and I enjoy the challenge of trying to come up with the right presentation that will get these fish to strike. Salmon are quite elusive. They tend to either you hit them when they're feeding or triggered, and sometimes you'll go for hours and not be able to get a strike. So you have to have some patience. And like I said, I enjoy the challenge of trying to catch these fish.
Trolling for salmon is a tedious process that takes time, patience, and a lot of hand movement on the line. And as Mike's arm began to get tired, he thought to himself, I can solve this.
Yeah, well, as an engineer, there's a lot of times I'll just kind of look at a problem and say, how might I be able to do this easier, better, or maybe even more fun? And so over the last, 5 years as I've been fishing the lake, I've come up with some different thoughts on some products that I could bring to market, but I hadn't really explored many of them. I did spend quite a bit of time on one, and I'm not going to talk about that one quite yet, but this other one is the one that I've just launched recently, and it's a motorized device to help with creating some kind of repetitive motion to the fishing line so that you can entice the fish to try to strike the bait. And it's called the Bait Ripper. It's the name of the product that I'm now just launched and started to sell. The name of my company is Cairns and Crags, and then I'll have other products that I'll sell under the product line name of Livewire.
Previously, you were manually using your hand to do this motion, correct?
Yeah, it's quite often that fishermen will use they'll hold the rod and either, give it some twitches or maybe some long movement some people call it jigging. I call it ripping, because that was what my dad always called it when I was a kid. He said, keep that fly moving, rip that rod. So that's why I named it the bait ripper. So it's you're trying to entice the fish by creating some jerky movement like a bait fish would have. The bait fish just don't swim along at some set speed. So you're trying to entice the fish to trigger and attack the bait.
Yeah, it sounds like you were the original bait ripper for your dad.
That's correct. And then the idea came about because after a while your arms get tired, and I even got to the point where I'd leave the rod in the rod holder and I'd just grab the line and I'd pull it by hand, right? So that's kind of where my idea came from. If I'm sitting there pulling the line by hand, and then I said, well, there must be some way to have something else do that for me.
And take it from the rest of us fishermen who participate in the annual Winni Derby, a salmon and lake trout competition that runs every May on Lake Winnipesaukee. The winner of last year's trout division was, well, Mike Donovan.
It was quite an exciting moment, but I'll just kind of lead up to it by saying that, we fished all day Friday. We caught the fish at noon on Saturday. And up to that point, we had only caught a couple fish, only a couple salmon, and I don't even think we had caught a lake trout at that point, but we were targeting both. There's 2 divisions in the Derby, right? So the salmon division and the trout division. And I'd fished, had planned to fish down at the Broads on Saturday. So we went down there early in the morning and we fished probably, for maybe 3 or 4 hours before we even got any fish at all into the boat. And Tex, who's my friend, caught a salmon, and so we kind of had one in the boat for the day. And then it was about noon. It was a really beautiful day. The picture, I'll go back and look at the pictures and remind myself I was in a t-shirt, and this was, mid-May, right? And blue sky, it was calm, no wind. And we were fishing along this structure that I tend to go back to many times because I've done quite well there. And again, it was about noon, and at that time I was fishing a long line instead of down on a downrigger, down at 40 feet. And the fishing rod went off, and I could tell it was a pretty good fish, and we weren't sure until we got it to the net. But when we got it in the boat, I was like, that's a nice lake trout.
Yeah, and lake trout are interesting fish. Since you are deep down, since you are using like a heavy line, you kind of don't really fight till they get a little bit closer up, right? Like there's a different fight compared to like a salmon where it you kind of know when you have it, versus a lake trout, you don't really know its size at first. Or did you know this was a pretty large fish?
Yeah, that's pretty much true. The lake trout will do what we call head shakes, and you can feel them when the bigger fish, when they start doing those head shakes, you kind of know right there that it might be a bigger fish. And so as he got closer to the boat, he actually gave me a pretty good run, which isn't all that common for lake trout, but it was big enough to strip my line back off, and he went right back to the bottom. But I finally got him up, and like I said, he was pulling pretty hard, and my cohort got the net under him, and we got him in the boat.
What was that feeling like when, you were waiting for the clock to tick down after you got that fish weighed in?
Well, I'll tell you, there's an awful lot of good fishermen on that lake, so I was nervous and hoping, that I could hold on to the lead. But you never know. There's a lot of good fishermen, and there's a lot of big fish in this lake, so it was a good feeling to end the tournament with the biggest trout, and I'll remember it forever.
So you might be asking, what was the final weigh-in on Mike's winning trout? 8.7 pounds. You can find the bait ripper at cairnsandcrags.com, and maybe, just maybe, you'll catch that fish that you'll tell stories about.
This episode is over, but please visit WinniPlus.com for more adventure. WinniPlus, the #1 way to explore the Lakes region.